Slitterhead has been out for a couple of weeks now at time of recording. I'm a bit fashionably late to the party on this one, but fortunately it's never too late to ramble about video games on the internet, especially one as interesting as Slitterhead. Despite me being a bit untimely about this, I really do think this game is interesting and there's a lot to be said for it, particularly in the wake of its relatively cold critical reception. So let's see what that was all about and also share some of my own thoughts. Slitterhead comes to us from director Keiichiro Toyama, best known for his previous works on International Track and Field, of course. Silent Hill and Siren, of course. And I actually think this is where the problems began. I think a lot of the impact and cause of Slitterhead's relatively muted reception are a case of mismatch expectations, so let me explain what Slitterhead is, and especially what it is not. Even though I feel like trailers made this pretty clear, despite the man's pedigree as a survival horror game director, Slitterhead is not a survival horror game. Slitterhead is an action game, like capital A, action game. Think Bayonetta, think Devil May Cry, think those kinds of mission-to-mission based, fight all the dudes kind of game, because Slitterhead is very firmly in that world. It's definitely still horror-themed, there is grotesque body horror, and the monster designs are as wonderfully disturbing as ever, but survival horror it is not. Nor is it trying to be. I mention this at the outset because I've read reviews, professional ones even, that have criticized the game for being a survival horror that's not scary, which I think is a flawed lens to view the game through because this is a game where you can leap a building if you want. Of course it's not scary. In Slitterhead you take on the role of the Hyoki, a formless entity with no memories who knows only one thing. They must destroy the Slitterheads, beings that have taken on the form of humans throughout the city of Kowloon, eating their brains, killing them, nasty stuff. This is the vector for a genuinely quite interesting combat system where at any point in time you can just hop out of the body you're currently inhabiting and slam yourself straight into a new idiot, and immediately, with no delay, manifest a mace made of blood to hit your foes with. I wouldn't necessarily describe the core combat as being very complex. There isn't exactly complicated combos or stagger timings like in Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. What you instead have is a variety of different mechanics that are each good for individual situations, and the game is more about picking the right tool for the situation rather than learning a character's moveset extensively. You have a small cast of core characters, each of whom have 3 abilities to their own, all of which behave differently and allow you to express a personal preference for how you play the game. For instance, I primarily favored Julie for most of the game. She can heal all of the NPCs in a room. She has a variety of decent attacking skills. In general, she's very mobile and survivable. But every time I watched another streamer play the game, they would gravitate towards a different style. Like another streamer I watch very much favored Alex, who has abilities that cast from health, and can turn the other NPC characters into literal bombs, where they just explode. And it's fun that Slitterhead allows that degree of personal expression via what characters you choose to play as in any given moment. Do you play cautiously? Do you play recklessly? Do you prefer to focus on your small cast of core strong characters? Or do you prefer a build where you make use of all of the individual unnamed NPCs lying around to take a more strength in numbers kind of approach? All of these strategies are individually viable and at times drift in and out of being more or less useful than each other depending on the situation. It's robust stuff. And the game gives each of its characters a couple of mandatory missions so that you have time to get acquainted with their particular moveset so you can decide on a playstyle that's right for you with the full knowledge of what they all do. This period of the game encompasses about the first half, where it's introducing new characters gradually, new abilities, new mechanics, and introducing you to the cast of enemies that will populate the individual scenarios. And unfortunately, I am forced to admit the first half is probably where the game peaks in terms of mechanical intrigue, because once it's done establishing all of its toys, the repetition does very much begin to set in. You can tell this is a game directed by Toyama because it borrows its structure more or less identically from Siren. Many of the levels have secondary objectives that are necessary to complete that will necessitate revisiting levels more than once, so you have to replay levels multiple times to get through the game. And some levels are just pretty similar to other ones, and broadly speaking there is not quite enough enemy variety for my liking. You will find yourself fighting the same guys pretty frequently. It's perhaps easy to say this is a symptom of the game's budget, which is visibly constrained in a lot of other ways, with the most obvious budget constraint being the near total lack of voice acting. I'm almost hesitant to harp on this because I'm sure if they could have afforded it, they would have done it. But all the same, outside of a select few pre-rendered cutscenes, the game doesn't have voice acting, and it does the Pokemon thing where it draws a weird amount of attention to the fact it doesn't have voice acting. Like, it's okay not to have voice acting, many games don't, and many games are enjoyable despite that. But Slitterhead definitely feels like it's missing something for not having it. A decent chunk of this game is spent in conversation with the characters whose bodies you inhabit, and during many of these exchanges, you just have to hear them repeat their combat grunts over and over again while reading the text, which just feels very strange. I don't want to hold it against it too hard because it is what it is what it needed to be in order to exist at all. But all the same, it doesn't disguise it well. I think things like this and the somewhat dumpy-looking models, let's be honest, are what leads people to call Slitterhead a PS3 game released in 2024, a statement I kind of chafe against a bit, because what they really mean is that Slitterhead isn't a boring, samey game that plays the same as every other action game released this decade. Slitterhead is here to show that you can still experiment and find interesting ways to create this kind of game. But I also think that sort of set it up to work against it in some ways, particularly with how the parrying system works. I believe the way parrying works will intentionally fuck with anyone who is used to Souls-likes that dominate the action game genre right now. In general, modern action games are very parry-heavy. Press the button with the right timing, invincibly deflect all incoming attacks. They bias very heavily towards reflexes and pattern recognition, and Slitterhead does have a parry mechanic. It's very rewarding if you are able to successfully get a lot of parries in on an enemy in quick succession. You'll activate a slowdown mode. I just fucking hit the microphone, very cool. That lets you deal a lot of damage to enemies very quickly. However, parries in this game are not invincible. Not even a little bit. So if you approach the game with a very modern game style, where you attempt to parry every enemy methodically one by one, you'll get your ass beat, because you can't parry more than one incoming attack at a time. In group fights, standing your ground and trying to parry your way through is a mug's game. The game wants you to jump around to different characters and attack from different angles. If you get hit on one character, immediately drop them and possess the guy standing behind the enemy hitting you instead, so you can hit them in the back of the head. Be the annoying enemy. You ever played an annoying beat-em-up where you just seem to always get punched in the back of the head no matter where you're standing? You can be the annoying enemy in Slitterhead. It's a great feeling. It can also be a very unforgiving game. I think this is also one of the reasons that the reception is so divisive, is that you can get individual characters killed extremely quickly in this game. It is very easy to get stuck in a corner and slapped to death real fast. But again, you're supposed to just immediately jump into a new body at the first sign of trouble. But every so often the game will throw you a situation where this is difficult or outright impossible, and then it can feel a little cheap. You know, I'm not saying this game's perfect. I definitely hit scenarios in this game where I was like, wow, this is a bit bullshit. There is some attempt to break up the fighting with investigation scenes where you need to track down a hiding Slitterhead with sight jacking, literally just sight jacking ripped straight off Siren. I find it very funny there's zero attempt made to even justify why this is a thing the protagonist can do. It's a Toyama game. There's sight jacking in it. You know how this works, leave me alone. And when you do track them down, a chase will ensue as you leap across the cityscape, using your cool blood superpowers to track down the target and slow them down, even tagging in some hits if you can. In these moments, the game ends up feeling something like Prototype, while the combat is more reminiscent of something like The Third Birthday, but what if it were melee-oriented and also not bad in all the ways that The Third Birthday is bad. So quite an interesting little potion they've got going on here, and it's tied together with an aesthetic package that I think is honestly pretty good. The dense, cramped space of Kowloon is lovingly rendered, and Akira Yamaoka brings a genuinely fantastic soundtrack to the whole affair. This game it's a vibe, man, and it's a good vibe. Slitterhead might not come packed with the latest and greatest in terms of visual fidelity, but it definitely comes packed with a whole lot of style, and it comes packed with a frame rate. Something a lot of games I've played recently don't seem to be able to manage consistently, so points for that. And completing this package is a story that I found very interesting. Gradually piecing together the mystery of what the Hyoki is, what the Slitterheads are, the people connected to the Hyoki and their inner lives, it's all rewarding stuff. And no spoilers from me, but the third act of the game really goes places in terms of how it integrates the core mechanics of combat back into the storytelling in a way I really wasn't expecting. It's the kind of thing I think a cleverer person could get a full-hour video essay out of, but this is a quick overview, so I'll save that for someone else to make. It shows a level of consideration and commitment to the themes and how they're expressed through gameplay that indicates that Slitterhead wasn't just rushed out quickly. It's a considered work from Toyama, one of the best directors in the medium. If you liked his work on Siren and Silent Hill and Gravity Rush, you will very much find his authorial voice in Slitterhead as well, as long as you are okay with playing an action game. The man very much still has it. I think Slitterhead is, broadly speaking, worth it, but speaking of worth, the game is priced at $45 American, and a thing that happened to me pretty often when I was streaming it was people complaining about this price point, and I'm not altogether too sure why. It's a roughly 10 to 15 hour long action game, depending on individual skill and difficulty setting and level of completionism, etc., which doesn't exactly put it on the short end for an action game. Devil May Cry 5 was even shorter, and everyone loved that game. Certainly there's a fair bit of repetition in the content in Slitterhead, but Devil May Cry 4 was also like that and was released for full price. Slitterhead isn't, it's actually slightly cheaper. It's a AA price for a AA game, it's exactly right. I think smaller budget productions like this should be allowed to price themselves this way. You know, obviously I'm not pointing a gun to your head and saying you need to buy Slitterhead or you're a fraud. If the game doesn't grab you, it doesn't grab you, fair enough. It's your money, do whatever you want with it. But I would like it if you could be more honest with yourself about whether or not the game just doesn't grab you or if it's a pricing issue. Because in an age of inflated budgets and gradually rising prices of video games, many AAA games are now $70 goddamn for some reason. I think Slitterhead represents a rare, healthy being of a project that works within its means. Where the fuck was the whole I want shorter games with worse graphics made by people paid more to work less crowd when this one launched, Seems like they all disappeared real fast. But I'm one of the real ones. I was here for it, and I continue to be here for it. Slitterhead is good. I recommend it. I think if anything I've said in this video has sounded appealing, you'll find something to like about Slitterhead. It's not perfect, but most of its imperfections are more symptoms of its low budget rather than any issue with the fundamental game design. In other words, Slitterhead 2 would be a very promising prospect, and I hope we get to see that timeline. I think we need more games like Slitterhead, and if you agree, I recommend you check it out. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. More things like this coming soon, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. And if you want your name in these credits, consider checking out the Patreon, where patrons get early access to all my videos and their name in the credits. Thanks again for watching, ta-ta for now.